The horn that day wasn't just noise, it was defiance. It ripped through the calm like something furious at the idea of peace itself. The sound rolled across our open acres, bold and ugly, carrying the weight of arrogance. Our land had known every kind of storm, flood, and harvest for 3 generations. It had endured nature's fury and family dinners under that same old oak tree. But never had it been tested by a noise like that, the kind that didn't just interrupt, but challenged everything still and sacred. I looked up from the fence I was fixing. The sun flashed off polished chrome so hard it nearly blinded me. There, at the edge of our property line, sat a monstrous truck, its engine growling like a beast waiting to strike. The man behind the wheel was as familiar as the sound itself. Richard Stanton, the self-appointed sheriff of Ridgefield Meadows HOA. Richard wasn't the kind of man who simply arrived somewhere, he announced himself. Always wearing those mirrored sunglasses that turned his eyes into armor, his smirk carried a kind of practiced dominance. Even his handshake felt rehearsed, like every motion was a performance meant to remind you who held control. That horn hadn't been a mistake. It was an insult dressed up as a sound. And then his voice followed, sharp and smug. "Hey, old man, you planning on turning that walking stake into burgers anytime soon?" I froze, not because of what he said, but because of who he said it to. Grandpa Joe sat on the porch, hat tipped low, a half-read book in his lap and a glass of sweet tea dripping with condensation beside him. He looked up, calm, steady, but I caught the faint twitch of his jaw. That tiny motion meant danger. It meant he was holding back words that could cut like barbed wire. And the walking stake Richard was mocking? That was Buddy, our bull. Buddy wasn't livestock. He was legacy. Grandpa had raised him after my great-grandfather died, said keeping Buddy alive kept something more than memory breathing on this land. Buddy had grown huge, slow, wise, a creature that didn't just exist on the land but seemed woven into it. He stood near the oak tree, that same spot he'd guarded his whole life, chewing lazily at the grass when Richard's laughter cut through the air again. A cold, barking laugh. The kind only insecure men make when they think cruelty counts as power. He cracked open a beer, gulped once, and tossed the can right against our fence. The metallic clang echoed like a slap across the field. That was the moment everything shifted. Buddy stopped chewing. His head lifted, ears turning forward. The air went still. You could almost feel the land hold its breath. Then came that deep, ancient sound, not quite a roar, not quite a growl, something older, heavier. It vibrated through the dirt, up through the soles of my boots. He took one slow step back. His hooves dug in, heavy and sure. His head lowered, horns gleaming white in the sunlight. And then, without warning, Buddy charged. It wasn't madness. It was purpose. Pure, unstoppable purpose. 2,000 pounds of history thundered across the pasture. The wooden fence that had stood for decades shattered like matchsticks as Buddy burst through, earth exploding beneath his weight. Richard's grin died before his brain even caught up. The truck barely had time to move. The impact sounded like the sky cracking open. Chrome crumpled. Glass burst. Metal screamed. The truck spun sideways, half airborne, before slamming nose-first into the irrigation ditch, a geyser of muddy water shooting up like the land itself had spat it out. For a long heartbeat, silence. Only the ticking of cooling metal and the soft trickle of dripping water. Then Buddy, calm as dawn, snorted once and went back to his clover patch like nothing had ever happened. I ran. My legs felt like lead, my chest like thunder. By the time I reached the ditch, Richard was clawing his way up, cursing and sputtering mud, looking like a man who'd just been flattened by his own pride. He slipped twice before managing to stand, rage and humiliation painting his face the color of raw meat. Grandpa didn't say a word. He stood, set his book aside, and walked down the porch steps. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like a coming storm crossing open plains. His boots barely crunched the gravel. He stopped just a few feet from Richard. The sunlight hit his glasses, turning them into mirrors, but I could still see the fire in his eyes, old, calm, unshakable. Richard tried to speak, voice trembling. "Joe, I need a tow." Grandpa looked from him to the wrecked truck, then back again. And then, without a word, he gave a single nod, small, certain, final. He turned, walked to the barn, and soon the old John Deere roared to life, deep, steady, sure as time. The sound of it cut through the stunned air like the voice of the earth itself. He hooked the tractor to that mangled chrome beast and pulled. No strain. No drama. Just raw, quiet power. That rusty green machine dragged the luxury truck out of the ditch like it was hauling a forgotten memory. It was a sight I'll never forget, old America pulling the new one back down to the dirt where it belonged. When it was done, Grandpa unhooked the chain, shut off the engine, and walked over to me. He didn't even glance at Richard when he said, "This land's got its own rules." Then he went back to the porch, picked up his tea, and sat like nothing had happened. But I knew better. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was warning. Richard climbed into his twisted truck, slammed the door, and spun out, spraying mud all the way down the road. I watched the dust cloud fade and felt it deep in my gut that wasn't over. It was only beginning. The next morning, an envelope was taped to our gate. White paper. Gold-embossed logo. The mark of the Ridgefield Meadows HOA gleaming in the sun. Inside were 3 citations. Keycap 1 property damage due to inadequate fencing. Keycap 2 unregistered livestock referring to Buddy. Keycap 3 creating an unsafe environment for motor vehicles. I actually laughed, the absurdity burned hotter than anger. They were fining us because his truck got wrecked. I tried calling the HOA office, voicemail. Emailed them, automated response. It was like trying to argue with a wall that smirked back. Grandpa read the papers once, then muttered, "Paper wars, always worse than bullets." He was right. Because over the next few weeks, those papers turned into rules. And those rules turned into weapons. The HOA didn't send men with guns. They sent emails and rules printed in polite fonts. One by one, the regulations started rolling in, tucked inside the monthly newsletter as if they were harmless. Noise restrictions. Fencing standards. Livestock weight limitations. But to anyone who actually worked this land, it was clear these weren't guidelines, they were slow poison. Then came the line that hit like a bullet. No non-commercial livestock exceeding 1,000 pounds within Ridgefield Meadows boundaries. There was only one creature that rule applied to, Buddy. And he wasn't alone. The millers down the road were fined for their miniature donkeys. The Gassers for keeping their old flock of hens. What had once been a working, breathing community was turning into something sterile, manicured lawns replacing open fields. Richard Stanton's fingerprints were on every page. He was transforming our world rule by rule, grin by grin. One morning, the mailman handed me a thick envelope, certified, official, heavy with bad intent. It read, "Final notice, 72-hour nuisance abatement and euthanasia order." For a moment, the words didn't register. Then they did, and my hands started shaking. They were ordering us to kill Buddy. If we didn't, they'd arrange humane disposal and send us the bill. Humane disposal, what a pretty phrase for something monstrous. I brought it to Grandpa. He didn't flinch. He just stared at the letter, jaw tight, eyes still as stone. Then he folded the paper once and set it down. "They're not touching him," he said quietly. "Not while I'm breathing." That night, sleep refused to come. The moonlight stretched across the pasture, silver and soft. Buddy stood under the oak tree like a statue, calm, unaware that the world was trying to erase him. That was when I remembered her. Sarah Jensen. Librarian, HOA board member, and about the only person in that nest of bureaucrats who seemed to still have a soul. I found her number in the old community directory and called before I could talk myself out of it. "Liam." Her voice was cautious, soft. "It's late. What's going on?" "They're trying to kill him," I said. "Buddy." "They sent an order." There was a long silence. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Meet me at the coffee shop in town. Tomorrow. Early. And don't tell anyone." The next morning, she was already there when I arrived, both hands wrapped around her cup like she was holding on for warmth that wouldn't come. "You're putting me in a terrible position," she whispered. "I know," I said. "But you also know this isn't about safety. It's about control." Her eyes darted around the cafe before she slid a thin folder across the table. Project Haven, she said. That's what it's called. Richard's been building it for a year. Inside were documents, maps, emails, layers of deceit dressed as progress. He's been buying land on the outskirts, she continued, voice trembling. He's got a county contact rezoning agricultural property to luxury residential. He's planning to build a gated community, high-end farm-style homes without the smell, the dirt, or the people who actually live off the land. The pieces fell together like rotten wood snapping under weight. I flipped through the pages, bile rising in my throat. On one meeting agenda, the words burned like fire. Item 4, finalize obstacle removal for remaining agricultural lots. Obstacles. That was us. That was Buddy. That was everything real left in Ridgefield. By the time I left that cafe, the clock was already ticking, 48 hours left before their so-called humane disposal. I spent the rest of the day on the phone. Lawyers, animal rights groups, county offices, all of them said the same thing. It's an HOA matter, son. On paper, they own the playbook. By dusk, I was out of options. Desperation drove me up to the attic, a place filled with dust, memories, and hope I hadn't realized I was still looking for. That's where I found Grandpa's old Navy chest. Inside, among yellowed maps and war medals, was a leather folder stamped homestead papers. Deeds. Receipts. Tax slips. And one document that stopped my heart cold, dated 1978, signed by 5 names, my grandfather among them. It was the original community charter. Buried deep in its legal wording was a single line. The traditional agricultural use of any original deed property, including the keeping of livestock, is an irrevocable right and shall not be removed except by unanimous vote of all founding families or their direct descendants. That was it, our bulletproof vest. We were descendants. So were the Millers. So were the Gassers. The HOA couldn't legally touch us. At that very moment, across town, a teenager named Leo, one of the Miller kids, posted a short video on TikTok. Buddy stood under the oak tree, his horns glowing in the sunset. The caption read, "The last free citizen of Ridgefield." By morning, the internet had found its hero. #stand with Buddy. #the HOA slayer. #Toro of justice. The hashtags spread like wildfire. The story caught traction on every feed, every platform. Overnight, a quiet rural rebellion had gone viral. And Richard Stanton? He absolutely lost it. The idea that his enemy had become an online legend, a bull no less, made him unravel. His carefully curated image of authority was cracking. The next afternoon, I heard tires crunching on gravel. A livestock trailer pulled up beside our gate, a sheriff's cruiser idling behind it. The deputy who stepped out was one of Richard's golfing buddies, the kind of man who wore a badge like a fashion accessory. "Afternoon," he said stiffly. "We have an order to remove the bull." I crossed my arms. "Do you have a court-issued warrant?" He hesitated. "Well, not exactly a warrant. It's an HOA safety action." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say that again for the camera." His face flushed. Richard's smirk, which had been hovering near the truck, vanished. The deputy muttered something, turned back to his cruiser, and left without another word. The video went online within the hour. By nightfall, it had racked up 1 million views. HOA president sends cops to steal bull without a warrant. That was the moment our quiet neighborhood turned into a battlefield. The next morning, my phone rang. "Liam. Marcus Daniels here, land use attorney. Saw your video. If those documents you have are real, your HOA broke 6 state laws. I'll take your case. No charge." It felt like the first breath after drowning. The storm was coming, but for once, it wasn't aimed at us. The hearing was held on a sweltering Thursday afternoon inside the Ridgefield Community Hall, the same place where bake sales used to happen, back when people still smiled at each other. Now it looked like a courtroom. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters whispered behind notepads, and Richard Stanton sat at the head of the long oak table like a king guarding a collapsing throne. He wore that smug HOA smile, the kind that said this is already decided. But for the first time, there was sweat on his collar. Grandpa sat beside me, wearing his old rancher's jacket. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were clear, the same eyes that once stared down storms at sea. Across the room, Sarah Jensen sat quietly, eyes downcast, guilt flickering like candlelight. When the chairperson banged the gavel, the room fell silent. "Mr. Stanton," she began, "today's hearing is to review your enforcement actions regarding Property 18B and its livestock. We've received numerous complaints." Richard interrupted, voice smooth as oil. "Yes, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. The bull is a documented hazard over 2,000 pounds, unpredictable, and kept within a residential zone. The homeowners have ignored every order. Our actions were necessary to protect this community." I stood up before she could respond. "With respect," I said, "that's a lie." All eyes turned to me. I slid the 1978 charter across the table, its paper yellowed but intact. "This is the founding charter of Ridgefield Meadows," I said. "Signed by 5 original families, including my grandfather, Robert Callahan. It states clearly that livestock kept by founding descendants cannot be restricted or removed without unanimous consent. You don't have that consent." The chairperson frowned, reading the line I'd highlighted. When she looked up, her expression had changed, calm turned to concern. "Mr. Stanton," she said, "were you aware of this document?" He shifted uncomfortably. "That charter is outdated. It was never ratified under the HOA's modern statutes." Marcus Daniels, our attorney, rose smoothly. "With respect," he said, "the HOA's existence depends on that same charter. If you invalidate it, you invalidate your own authority. You can't cherry-pick history." A murmur swept through the room. Cameras clicked. Richard's face turned crimson. "This is absurd," he barked. "You people have no idea what you're talking about." But his voice was drowned out by the sound of someone's phone, a notification tone that echoed like a bell of judgment. A reporter had just received an alert. "County confirms, Project Haven tied to HOA President's development firm." The headline spread across every screen in the room. It was over. Sarah rose slowly from her seat. "He told us it was about safety," she said softly. "But it was never about that. He wanted to clear the land, make it clean, quiet, profitable." Richard's words stuttered and died in his throat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the chairperson removed her glasses and sighed. "This hearing is adjourned. The HOA's actions are hereby suspended pending legal review." Applause erupted, quiet at first, then rising like thunder. Buddy's fate was sealed, and for once, it wasn't doom. That evening, the sunset over Ridgefield painted the sky in amber and rose. The news trucks had packed up, the crowd had thinned, but something electric lingered in the air, the hum of change. Buddy stood near the fence, chewing lazily on hay, completely unaware that he'd just won a war. Grandpa rested his arm on the post beside me. "You did good, kid," he said. I smiled. "We did good." A few weeks later, the county audit confirmed everything: embezzlement, bribery, zoning fraud. Richard Stanton was indicted on 6 counts and vanished from Ridgefield without a word. His luxury homes were never built. Instead, the town rediscovered its roots. The Millers reopened their produce stand. The Gassers brought back their hens. Even the HOA, stripped of its venom, started listening instead of dictating. Sarah visited often after that. She brought cookies sometimes, and guilt other times, but Grandpa always waved her in. "Everyone makes mistakes," he'd say. "It's what you do after that matters." Then, one evening, she showed up with a proposal: a community memorial. Not for war or loss, but for resistance. The unveiling happened 6 months later, under that same oak tree where Buddy used to stand. The statue wasn't fancy, just bronze and steel, but alive with motion. It captured Buddy mid-step, head raised, horns glinting toward the horizon like a symbol of quiet defiance. At the base, a plaque read, "To those who stand their ground even when told to move." Grandpa stood beside it, tears shining in his eyes. "He was more than a bull," he whispered. "He was a reminder." Reporters called it the day the HOA lost its crown. But for us, it wasn't about revenge, it was about something simpler. Dignity. Roots. The right to breathe without permission. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the stars came out, I walked alone through the field. The air smelled of earth and hay and freedom. The same wind that once carried the sound of Richard's threats now carried laughter, music, life. I paused under the oak and looked at the statue, Buddy, eternal, unbothered. And I thought about what Grandpa always said. Some things aren't meant to be managed. They're meant to be respected. He was right. Epilogue. A year later, a new family moved into Ridgefield, young couple, small daughter, wide-eyed with wonder. She pointed at the statue and asked, "Who's that?" Her father smiled. "That's Buddy. He saved this place." And maybe he did. Not with horns or strength, but with presence, a living truth that refused to be buried under rules and signatures. Because sometimes, the loudest freedom doesn't roar. It simply stands still and dares the world to move it.